We are now living in the age of math-based cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. We are seeing it everywhere in the news these days. The reason why it's rising so quickly in popularity is this technology is provably the most fair form of value transfer anyone has ever devised, and it's starting to become far too powerful to ignore. Since the beginning of human civilization, it has always been a struggle to decide how to determine the value of goods and services in such a way that could be mutually agreeable to all people. We have had many forms of barter and money systems that have come and gone through the centuries, but ultimately one of the greatest challenges has always been how to make them fair for everyone. In our last segment, we started to look at how some people seem to have a disadvantage and that slavery is still a terrible problem. With all our great technological advances, surely we should have abolished these heinous practices by now. What we would like to help you see through this educational series is how cryptocurrency has the power to even the playing field for everyone in such a way that abusive fiscal practices will become much harder to employ over time. Since corruption seems to be a natural byproduct of any system that imparts value, why not create a mathematics solution that can't be tampered with or manipulated like the old sovereign or politically controlled forms of money? But before we get into how technologies like Bitcoin will systematically dismantle abusive practices affecting millions of enslaved or impoverished individuals, we need to dig a little deeper into how these systems actually work. Satoshi Nakamoto, which is just an invented name by the way, anonymously created the cryptocurrency called Bitcoin in order to establish a value transfer system that could not be hacked or taken down by any government. He did this as an unselfish donation to humanity. He was not commissioned or paid anything to create it. He then donated it to the open source software community to improve and enlarge. Incidentally, if you weren't already aware, when something is part of the open source software community, that means it's free to use by anyone and improvements can be made through collective efforts of other like-minded contributors. Think about how Wikipedia works. There are thousands of contributors holding the effort aloft at any given time. And the reason it cannot be abolished by any government is because the entire ledger of every Bitcoin transaction ever made is located on thousands of individual computers called nodes throughout the world. In order to destroy a network like that, each and every one of those computer nodes would have to be taken down by definition. If any government wanted to foolishly attempt that, it would be incredibly expensive and would never be successful. It would be just as futile to pass a law, say, declaring it illegal to get infected with coronavirus. It doesn't even make sense. Oddly enough, some world politicians and supposed financial experts have been so uninformed as to the power and unstoppable nature of this technology. They have continually made buffoonish attempts to try to outlaw or create infringement on cryptocurrency, always failing miserably and usually never really understanding why. I've often been amused by this through the years, and frankly, I just chalk it up to the likelihood that most politicians don't have much of an education in advanced mathematics. So perhaps we should not be too critical of them. It is entertaining to watch high-profile critics unwittingly expose their obvious ignorance as they attempt to dismantle or regulate cryptocurrency. Satoshi Nakamoto invented Bitcoin with a deep desire to help close loopholes that can lead to corruption by using this diffusely managed and encrypted mechanism known as distributed ledger technology. Now, if you don't know what that is, let me give you a little background regarding this innovation, why it came into existence, and how it works. Sadly, history has taught us that governments seem to have the tendency toward becoming corrupt over time, most commonly through taxation and/or asset seizure. The technology behind cryptocurrency was created to specifically combat abuse and fight the corruption that invariably tends to creep into any system of value exchange. Most of us are so used to the idea that there will always be third parties trying to act in a parasitic way to our monetary systems. I think most of us just assume it's inevitably the cost of doing business and always will be. I think most people assume we can never entirely dispel corruption, so why even try? As computer processing power has become faster and able to store more information through larger hard drives, it naturally allowed for some very interesting philosophical and ethical problems to emerge. For example, in the 1990s, computers had advanced to the point that it became possible to store and transmit even large files such as music or movies in such a way that more primitive computers simply couldn't manage before. This advancement seemed to happen so fast we found ourselves in a situation where we couldn't even enact laws fast enough to protect the copyright holders. Initially, there seemed to be no feasible way to stop the rapid sharing and frankly theft of digital assets through law enforcement. For those of us that lived through that era, all of a sudden people were uploading versions of their rightfully owned digital assets such as the old CDs or DVDs. They used easy-to-obtain free software such that downloading music and movies held in digital format became essentially free to anyone. People all over the place were doing it. It was a huge problem for content creators. In fact, there was a very popular system called Napster which grew rapidly and within a very short period of time became one of the largest hubs for downloading free digital content, usually music or movies. What the company essentially did was to offer a publicly available ledger listing all the available digital assets. The most common way people used Napster was to both upload and download digital music files of every kind. The service worked by connecting you instantly to someone else that had what you wanted. It was extremely easy to use, and you could download just about any song you wanted for free. Napster did not directly provide the digital assets to their users as an organization, so they felt that what they were doing was essentially a form of free speech. Just because Napster could tell you, based on their large centralized ledger, who you could contact to get free stuff, they felt they were not doing anything illegal. Eventually, they were sued, and the courts disagreed, and the centralized ledger they created was shut down by law enforcement. For those people that were basking in the era of gorging on free digital content, the demise of Napster was a massive disappointment, to say the least. Other organizations attempted to continue on the tradition after the service was taken down by government, but ultimately centralized ledger technology proved to be largely incapable of surviving government attacks. But this is good, right? It really isn't fair for content creators to have their copyrights infringed by a movement like this. But millions of Napster users became so accustomed to the free content they continued to look for an innovative solution to keep the free stream of content flowing. It would only be a matter of time before some clever solutions to government intervention would be discovered. Around 2001, a talented programmer by the name of Bram Cohen proposed a profound question in regard to safeguarding an individual's ability to transmit their digital assets. He essentially asked, why do we have to keep all the information which lists these digital assets located in one place like Napster did? If we keep all of it in one place, that means you are just one SWAT team away from being shut down. He proposed an open source program containing a constantly updated ledger, similar to what Napster was using, be given to every person that wanted to use the network. Thus, governments would have to shut down every single participant's computer that supported the system. Now that's a lot of SWAT teams. So he built a network which accomplished just that. And you may have heard of it. It's called BitTorrent, and still to this day, it is the decentralized ledger for obtaining free copyrighted digital assets. Governments have, for good reason, been racking their brains as to how in the world to shut BitTorrent down since it was invented in 2001, but have never even come close to figuring out how to do it. It is alive and well. Frankly, it seems like lately the creators of digital content have just learned to live with BitTorrent. Fighting it seems futile anymore. So after BitTorrent proved that we could create a system which seemed impervious to governmental attacks, many of us in the open source community naturally stumbled on the next great philosophical question. Why can't we do what Bram Cohen did with digital entertainment assets, but this time, do it with money? Bitcoin. After all, most money is just expressed digitally anyway. The vast majority of it does not exist on paper. Most of it is stored as an encrypted digital expression. Its value is arbitrarily defined the way your government in its infinite wisdom decides. Now this is the point where your understanding is about to be significantly enlightened if you pay close attention. And you will be way ahead of the average politician if you grasp what I am about to say. If you really stop to think about it, your government handles money in the same centralized way that Napster abused the recording industry. Think about that. Furthermore, if you look even closer, government currency should really be considered a shared asset of the citizens, which in a sense have a copyright claim which would be unfair to abuse, counterfeit, or manipulate. By definition, when your government prints or creates new money, thereby diluting the value of your currently held notes, they systematically rob you of your copyright value right out from underneath you, and it's just as wrong as stealing creative content like we saw in the Napster example. And most people go through everyday life having no clue they are being robbed. If you live in an industrialized nation, the theft is usually so carefully hidden it often seems undetectable. But if you live in an impoverished nation or have been subject to enslavement, they don't really bother to hide the abuse in those situations. The slaves have no conceivable way to escape it. Until now. In the next segment, we will be taking a deeper dive into the perils of being born into an impoverished state and how slaves are trying to survive it these days. You're going to start to see how decentralized systems like Bitcoin are going to provide leverage to the underprivileged people of the world in such a way that has never been seen before. You are going to learn more about the mysterious inventor of Bitcoin and his true vision of what cryptocurrency could become, because I know Satoshi and I know what he stands for. Again, my name is J.R. Forsyth, and I've been involved in the development of these systems from the beginning. Join me on this journey of enlightenment and find out how you can benefit from this massive upheaval which is about to change the world in ways previously thought to be impossible. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook using the links below. I would love to hear your comments, and I am always learning from the insights of others living in varied circumstances all over the world. Ultimately, we're going to do this together, as globally united citizens working toward a greater freedom from abuse and tyranny.